Changers.
Hi, I'm Chris Uglietta, and welcome back to Gamechangers, powered by data.ai. Today, I'm proud to present a very special episode. In fact, I was invited to host and participate on a mobile gaming panel this year at South by Southwest 2022. Thank you to Mike Romo for putting together this great panel. On the panel, we have Travis Boatman from Carbonated. He's going to tell you what he does, so I won't get into that now. Lucy Hoffman from Carry1st. Shelby Moledina, who I just finished the podcast with, and I encourage you to come back to listen to that in about a week from this launch. And then myself from data.ai. And we really talk about, first of all the backgrounds and kind of what's going on at each of the folks on the panel, but also, kind of everyone's a gamer now, what's happening in gaming and just sort of the overall growth. So hope you enjoy it. And I'll tell you, it was great to be back in person at South by Southwest. We all went to lunch, got real amped up on a lot of iced tea, as we do here in Texas, and got to know each other and kind of figure out, what we're going to focus on. So we became fast friends and really had a great time doing it. And to all of you that attended in person, I appreciate it. As you'll hear at the tail end of this episode, there were some really great questions and engagement from the audience. In fact, we got kicked out of the room by South by Southwest. So, really proud that it was such a success, and I hope you enjoy. As always, please hit me up with any questions, comments, or if you'd like to participate in Game Changers. Thanks a lot. Myself, I'm a product and a marketer. I've spent most of my time relevant to this at Zynga, and now I work at data.ai, and we provide alternative data in the space we're formerly known as App Annie. I'll pass it to Lucy here.
Cool. Hey guys, I feel like I have like hype music behind me. It's
Yeah.
pretty awesome, right? I'm like, did you compose this for my game? So I'm Lucy. I'm one of the founders of Carry1st. We're a mobile games publisher focused on serving gamers across Africa. So we focus both on the UA and player engagement side, how people discover and engage with the games, but also we created a payments platform because our gamers don't have credit cards. So we've given them other ways to pay for content and get involved. So we work with studios around the world and really help them access what we consider to be a really exciting, dynamic, and fast-growing new market.
I'm Travis Boatman. I've been doing mobile games for a long time, actually games since the late 80s, and then mobile games I started in 1998. So I've seen the whole arc of mobile games from like WAP games to Brew and Java to the launch of the iPhone and all those things. I was at a company called Jammed Mobile, a pure play publisher for mobile. Then I was at EA, then Zynga, and then a couple years ago founded my own company making mobile games. So sort of had a long arc on that, and like talking about sort of both the history and the future of mobile as a broad arc.
I'm Shelby Moledina. I've also been in games a little over 20 years. I worked on console and PC games, kind of traditional games, for about 8 years before I moved into Roblox briefly, and then mobile games. So I was at DNA, learned a lot about Japanese-style live operations and monetization. I was at Warner Brothers for quite a few years, working in a central role with monetization and product management across all the studios, and then back on studio side. And then 2 years ago, I co-founded Double Loop Games with Emily Greer, who is the co-founder of Congregate also. And she and I kind of formed up to make games for people who don't consider themselves to be gamers, which is actually funny. It's kind of the name of this panel. So that's literally what we do. And I have a background in a lot of mid-core mobile games, as well as some less, and our focus at my company now is on games that are accessible to hopefully almost everybody.
Maybe I can also add, I am probably the least experienced person on this panel from the gaming industry. I too joined the gaming industry only recently, 4 years ago, and think it is one of the most exciting places to be. It's a combination of like creativity, science, art, like social. It's awesome. So yeah, it's really it's like an honor to be up here with these giants from the industry.
That's exactly why I love it. It's that the cross-functional collaboration and fun is amazing. It's always something new.
Well, I think we'll start with your story. We were talking over lunch, like I said, and you really came into it into left field.
Totally.
Working in Africa, and I'll do a little pop quiz. You didn't know this was coming. This is kind of a global pop quiz, but so users in Brazil, Indonesia, and South Korea are on their phones more than 5 hours per day on apps. Right, that's a lot. Mm-hmm. And what do you think it is in the U.S.?
Oh, and I'm not supposed to have looked
More
at
or
the
less.
notes.
Oh yeah, right. Oh, shoot.
More.
Is it more or less? Let's go rate more for the audience.
That's for sure.
Less, yeah. 4.1 hours per day. Right, but we're also watching another 3 hours of TV, so probably at the same time, if you're like me. And last year alone, there were 300,000 new games launched. So a lot of growth here. But you're operating in South Africa, and that's not something that's really been part of the narrative until now for me. Brazil, Turkey, these are kind of the core growth areas that we talk about investment-wise. So if you could sort of tell us how that started, and then I want to learn about the opportunity there, what you're up to.
Yeah. So when we got started, I've been living in South Africa now for 10 years. My co-founder is originally from Sierra Leone, which is a tiny country in West Africa, mostly known really for Ebola and blood diamonds. And we came to this together to think, how could we build a really meaningful consumer internet company for the continent? And that's really when we came upon gaming. And if you believe that play is this essential human need, which we do, and that with our phones, we have the ability to play more often than we ever had before, right? You can take it anywhere, to the bathroom, to the subway, sitting next to your spouse in bed and kind of ignoring them. Then what you've seen happen worldwide was just this massive engagement on the mobile phone we expect to see in all emerging markets, including in Africa. And we were really inspired by a lot of the great massive internet companies coming out of places like China and Southeast Asia. 25 years ago, Tencent was just making a chat app, and I think all of us over here were just there's a Chinese chat app we're not thinking too much about. Then they started licensing games, building their own games, and now it's 1 out of every 3 gaming companies is owned by Tencent. But they started out because there was this massive population coming online for the first time, and they understood what was unique about consumers in that market. 11 years ago, you saw Garena get started in Southeast Asia, and they basically made a really fragmented emerging market look like one unified market for their publishing partners like Riot with League of Legends, right? For most folks in Southeast Asia, when they engaged with League of Legends, it was because of Garena and what they understood about the users and how to access them and convene them. And now you've just seen they probably have the largest, most active communities in the world, again, because there was a local partner who understood the nuances of that user base. And so, I think a combination of being on the continent, working working alongside of young people and just seeing the opportunity got us really excited. And so, basically started 4 years ago with a vision of building the Tencent or C Group of Africa. Not there yet, but that was the vision.
Thank you. And so we're seeing a lot of growth there. On the extreme end, looking at Tunisia, which is one of the smaller markets there, 500% download growth in the past 24 months. Egypt, which is the biggest market, 91% growth according to data.ai data. And so is that driven by, what's really driving that? What are you seeing kind of on the ground there?
Yeah, so what it's not being driven by is UA spend, right? All of this is organic. This is population size increasing. It's people getting access to smartphones for the first time because cost of devices is coming down. There's a fairly new Chinese company called Transsion. I think it's only about 7 years old. Last year they shipped over 500 million handsets to the African continent. And the average price of those phones is $125. So again, democratizing access to the internet and obviously to apps and mobile games. So we think a lot of it is just due to underlying infrastructure and growth. and obviously the speed of technology and how it's, you're able to see the cost of these devices come down and become more accessible.
Got it. Well, I'm curious about the types of games that you build for a $125 phone, because the one in my pocket's like 9 times more expensive.
Yeah, what I always say to this is like, I was playing mobile games like 8 years ago, and I thought they were awesome, right? But like our phones had much less power and storage space. Do you guys remember when the iPhone came out and U2's album was preloaded? And everyone was like,
Right.
How do I get the U2 album off my phone? Because I need more storage because I want to download that app. That is the experience of our gamers, right? Like it's not, they can still download games that are 100 megabytes, but they might not be able to download 20 of them. They'll pick like the 5 of them, and then they'll be really economical around the storage because it's limited. But we had that experience, and it didn't mean that we thought at the time our games were any less sophisticated or fun. It's like Back to the Future.
And how's connectivity? Are these more a single player experience, or are they merging into social?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best games have some social component. Again, I think there's like a lot of it that you enjoy with your friends, whether it's competing, cooperating. But connectivity is limited, right? So only 15% of our gamers in sub-Saharan Africa have access to 4G. So most people are only on 2G and 3G, and even like 5 years from now, like 65% of the continent will be on 4G, and the rest 2G and 3G. We're not even talking about 5G. And so connectivity will remain a challenge. And so for us, we look for games that have asynchronous play. I think when you want to think like mass market, we also think that there's a group of people, and I've mentioned this to Travis, that are like hardcore gamers, right? And so they will want to play games that have synchronous gameplay with their friends, but they won't be able, they'll choose a better phone or finding a Wi-Fi hotspot instead of console, right? It's a different switch. They're choosing like, I'm gonna go get a slightly better phone and I'm gonna go to my friend's house because he has better connection. And like that, they're not gonna sit and play console, they'll still sit and play on their mobile devices. So you'll still see that, it's just a change in behavior.
Do you still see the basic behavior that everyone is a gamer? Everyone wants that solitaire game on their phone or a puzzle game.
Yeah, I mean, I not everyone is a gamer, but I do think just like we see it in in different markets, like games have so many different flavors, right? I know these two, I'm like super inspired by their work and have completely different genres that will serve like different types of gamers, and we see that in the market as well. Same type of diversity, right? Puzzle games do really well, shooters do really well. Not usually with the same person.
Yeah, I'll throw something interesting on there. When we were at JamDad, this is 2003, here in the United States, we had a version of Tetris that was Tetris real-time multiplayer. We had a version of Bejeweled that was Bejeweled real-time multiplayer. And that was back on, sort of pre-2G or sort of CDMA and 1XRTT. And what was interesting about those games is network latency is quite low, even on old networks, because you think about talking to somebody, like the bounce back is pretty fast. So packet latency is pretty good, and the devices were fine to run a relatively simple game like a Tetris or Bejeweled multiplayer. Those games are 256K. And they were very successful. They were real-time multiplayer, and they did quite well. The difference is as the devices got bigger, you have room for more graphics, and as the networks got faster, you can move more data. But you can still move small data very fast, even on old networks, because people need to talk to each other. So you're not going to wait 30 seconds for the person to respond on the other side of the phone. So network latency, so if you design games for your technology limitations, you can design really great games for kind of anything. If that makes sense.
That's awesome.
So you're putting money into local teams there. I'm curious about what that looks like, the origin story of these teams. And then after that, I would like to learn about the growth model.
Yeah. So we have a fully distributed team. And we're 43 people now in 18 different countries. And some of those teams are on the ground. We have what we call nodes because we are fully distributed, so no offices, but we have like a group of people in Morocco, in Nigeria, in Kenya, and in South Africa because we really look at the whole continent. And then we have folks, experienced gaming professionals from across Europe who've joined the team as well because honestly, the gaming industry is in its infancy on the continent. So there aren't, gaming PMs who are sitting in Lagos, Nigeria. So what we've done is really have like a hybrid approach to how we're building our team, and really trying to invest in actually starting to build that industry on the continent, even through our own company, like making sure the junior folks we're bringing into the organization are learning from, again, best and brightest who've done this before and actually been able to ship successful titles. And and so trying to both have this like global and local approach. And then I guess on growth, growth looks a little bit different for us. There's still a place for Facebook and Google, don't get me wrong. But a lot of the discovery is in person. It's very social. It's like a very social way of learning and discovering about products, not just digital ones, but also physical ones. And so what we've invested in a lot is actually in-person activation and incentivizing people to get engaged with our model. So for example, when we launched a game in 2019, we actually had university ambassadors who got commission on installs and game credits sold. And it was great because you have these like really hyper connected, dense populations on university campuses, and they were going around and like selling our game. It's kind of like the new newspaper route. I don't know if you guys have seen that TED Talk. But it was awesome. And we had the stickiest and most like lucrative gamers come out of that growth channel, which we thought was pretty interesting.
That's super refreshing. I imagine QR codes were a big part of that as well. QR
codes are a big part of that. Influencers are a big part of it. Brand is a big part of it. It's not just the algorithm.
I think there's probably an opportunity here stateside for that. I look forward to seeing that grow. All right, well, thank you. Wanted to talk to Shelby for a second. You are in pre-release for a pretty interesting game, and I think we should talk about genre hybridization, which is kind of a buzz thing these days. And first of all, just kind of tell us what you can about what you're doing.
Yeah, our game is, like you said, in pre-release, so the game is very polished and it's a full experience, but we're testing through play testing, through limited market, open installs and friends and family to kind of solidify metrics strategically, so working on like early D1 to D3 retention, then working on longer term, then working on monetization. So that's kind of where we are. The games we focus on making are, like I said earlier, people who don't consider themselves to be gamers, but are likely playing games for hours and hours. A hybrid game, like you're mentioning, something like some that you guys might know, Gardenscapes and Homescapes, where they have a puzzle core and then there's a narrative and decorative game, kind of meta game that the puzzle moves you through, and there's that kind of combination keeps you interested. Something, I like those games, but the metagame there is a little bit shallow. And one issue with straight puzzle games is that for those players, something we looked at was the social play is somewhat limited because with a straight just puzzle game, all you can really do are kind of point-based bars that you fill up and leaderboards and things like that. Whereas you look at some other types of games that are more collaborative and there's crafting and building and things, those types of games can support much more meaningful social play. So what we wanted to do was create a game that is familiar and welcoming to the players who may not consider themselves to be gamers, and they can start and they can play with a very delightful and relaxing core game, and then move into slowly and safely feeling for them. And friends playing and word of mouth is really, really important to this audience as well. If you're playing, then I might feel more safe playing. So move them slowly into social experiences that are tailored, small, safe, and then moving them into more bigger groups, maybe guild play, where you're really focused on collaboration, cooperation type of competition against other groups. And I've seen that be really powerful in many games. And it's really, the challenge is like, there's so many mid-core type of live operation, live event styles that actually the loops and the mechanics are really, can be really meaningful and fun for every audience. So it's really about taking those and kind of distilling them down to what is going to be approachable and delightful for our audience. You can think about a raid boss being like, what if we're all painting together? Our game's not a painting game, but things like that. You can sort of take those concepts and twist them.
That's cool.
Seems to me like this is a good story of hyper casual kind of opening the market and really making us all recognize that we are gamers. And I have a puzzle game on my phone, and then this is an opportunity for you all to take that group and really make them into more of a core gamer and introduce social features. What's that curve been like? What are the challenges there?
So in that puzzle market, as for people who look at the market, you may know there's like match 3 incumbent puzzle game companies that are just at the top. They're rock solid. They're very entrenched. It's very hard for a new company to come out with a new match 3 puzzle game. So that's a big challenge. If you want to reach that audience, we need to have an angle that is refreshing and a little different, but not so different that they don't know what they're doing. And because I've been on many games where, we come up with some really fun, awesome mechanic, but it's too mentally, it's not familiar enough. And some people really love high cognitive load games, and those people will play forever and ever. But if you want to have a very large audience, they're looking for a little more relaxation. So we need to find something that is not just red ocean, but is interesting to those players, brings them in. And another challenge is just, if you're doing a hybrid game, to look at, are you doing a combination that is sort of the join of those two audiences and not just this tiny sliver of intersection? So that's the opportunity, is to grow into both, hopefully.
Please.
Can I ask
Please, yes.
stupid questions? Do you mind? What is Mesh 3 and what do you consider a hybrid game?
So the question was not stupid,
That was not stupid.
first of all, and it's what's match 3 and what's a hybrid game? Is that correct? Okay.
If you've played something like Candy Crush, and Bejeweled is a classic match 3 as well. So it's just that sort of mechanic where you've got colored pieces on the board and you do switches to match 3 or more together. That mechanic has been around forever and skinned in different ways, and is really fun, and it's familiar. It might be the kind of same thing, but people like new puzzles, and just the familiarity of it combined with challenge is comforting for people. And a hybrid game is where it might not just be, Bejeweled, for example. You play Bejeweled, you play the next level, you play the next level. A hybrid game is where you've got, and again, a good example is Gardenscapes or Lily's Garden. You play the puzzle, you play something like a match 3, and by playing that puzzle, you're getting points or resources that help you in another loop. So in Gardenscapes, that meta loop is, I play a puzzle, I earn a star, and that advances the narrative on the kind of garden side, the house side, and I can decorate something. And you can't move forward there unless you're playing the puzzle. So that's one example of a hybrid game. There are lots of ways to do it.
Great question.
Yeah, and all of us would love questions at any time. Please don't feel like you're interrupting. We'd prefer to do discussion.
Yeah, it's more fun to do questions because we know we're answering whatever you guys want to know.
Yeah.
So. You can always tell by how many heads
Please.
are down versus how many heads are up on sort of the
Yeah.
the level there.
So I need to repeat the question for the mic. So how do you build games for younger players without actually targeting them, because that's against the rules? Okay.
So the game that I'm working on now and most recently they aren't specifically targeted at children, but we do find that kids love to play them because it's kind of a fun, delightful game. So there are a lot of laws around COPPA compliance, and so you need to, there's a lot of back-end work you need to do to make sure that personal information is able to be deleted or not stored, and combine that with something we might talk about, which is Apple's changes to what data you can track, mean that we do have less information about our players that we've acquired than in the past. So in that model, a game that is just more widely appealing can in some ways do better than a game that needs to be hyper-focused, because it's harder to find those hyper-focused audience members now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think on the data side of things, in terms of how you gather data, there's lots of ways you can gather data. And she was talking about the server side or the back end. What you do, depending on your game, if it's networked, you can pull down lots of data and then sort of slice that data up in different ways. So even if you don't necessarily have all the data that you would normally have, if they're talking to your server at all, you can suss out a lot of information. Even if you have no idea who they are, you might know how fast they're progressing from level 1 to 10. And you might know by their IP address, maybe sort of where they are in the country, not specifically, but you may say like, well, people in Los Angeles are progressing faster between level 1 and 10 than people in Oklahoma. And you might go like, why is that? And you can sort of suss that out. So there's sort of, you can sort of back out a lot of data, or you can get direct data. And to her point, she's right, that with Apple and ATT, if you ask for that information and the customer says, sure, you can get a mountain of information. And so typically I think what you're seeing was, sort of Jobs' whole argument was just ask the customer. If the customer says yes, you can get everything you want. And so while there's this tension going on between the ad providers like the Facebooks and Googles of the world, the reality is that if customers like your product and you say, just can I have your data? And they say yes, you have all the data you need.
Yeah, great question. So in terms of, just to touch a little more on the genre hybridization, it seems like there's some clear upsides for user acquisition and being able to kind of promote multiple genres into one game. And is it too early, or have you had any learnings there, or anything you can speak to?
It is a little early for us, but our plans are we'll be doing testing around creatives that may highlight, say, the core puzzle-ish mechanic, or something that's more on the meta loop. With our game, it's kind of two audiences that have an affinity for the other type of game. But if you get somebody who's like, I really like, again, I'm going to use the example of painting, which is not our game. But like, if somebody was like, I love painting games, and we highlight the part of the game that is about painting to them, then that might bring them in. Whereas if they saw an ad that was about the puzzle side of the game, they might not have clicked on it. So we'll be doing a lot of testing around that type of stuff. And then the dream that every developer I've ever worked at has had is that, and not actually done it, is then, depending on how they came in and what background you think they have, then to tweak the onboarding experience for them to focus more and start them, say, in the painting part of the game versus the puzzle part of the game. So that, really sophisticated companies with a lot of tools have had many years to build that up. Like, that's kind of the dream.
Yep.
That's cool.
Thanks. And I think this next question would be for you and Travis, is how do you use UA Creative to guide the actual product development and make some decisions up front by testing ads in the market, or if that's something you do at all?
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think one of the neat things, there's a lot of noise in the industry, so I'm kind of a little bit of a mobile zealot advocate, so just know that I'm going to always sort of put mobile first. It's kind of my rationale. If anyone wants to hear me rant on mobile, I can do like a 5-minute rant on like why mobile. But that aside, one of the benefits of why mobile UA is so powerful is that it's such an inexpensive way to reach an extremely vast audience, and the conversion for that vast audience is incredibly easy from mobile to mobile. So what do I mean by that? If you want to test, let's say somebody's in the music industry, or you're working on a movie or anything, for tens of dollars, you can run a Facebook ad for your movie or for your music thing or for your event that you're going to run. I mean, Facebook makes most of its money targeting small local businesses in local regions, like a laundromat in Pacoima or something, whatever. But you can use those tools to test really quickly and inexpensively your idea. So we do this for gaming, but you could do it for anything. And what you can do is you make an image or an ad for whatever your business or service is going to be. It could be a music app. It could be a new movie coming out. It could be you're going to have a big event in the hills and you're going to invite all these people to spend. You can make an ad for that, and for $10, $20, $30, run it and see who converts. And what do I mean by converts? Well, you put the ad up on Facebook. You can just go into Photoshop and knock out something simple that is your business. Put that up, run the ad, and then where do they go? When they click on the ad, drop them into a survey. Drop them into a Facebook group. Just send them somewhere. And then ask the questions that you have. Hey, you saw this ad. Would you like to sign up for this new event that we're having? Or would you like to, play my new game or my new service? And in that way, you can get a really inexpensive read on, is your product or service is it gonna work? And what's great about doing it on Facebook or some other form of user acquisition is if it works there, then you can scale it later, which means, maybe your business would have worked sort of organically, but if it works there, you can then profitably invest more money and grow that audience because you already tested that it works. And so that's how we started our company, and lots of companies do that. But it's not constrained to games alone. It's just that some of these methodologies are sort of tested in the crucible of gaming because there's lots of competition and there's big business there. So a lot of it gets kind of Darwinistically hammered out there. But then it expands beyond that, and you can use it for really anything. That all makes sense? So that's kind of how we use it, and I think it's effective beyond games.
Yeah.
Great. Yes, please, hop in. And there's a mic right next to you if you wouldn't mind.
If you want, then we don't need to.
I won't repeat you.
Either way.
Either way.
Thank you.
So it's a two-part question. First is, wanted to understand, like looking back in the last couple of years, maybe something that surprised you in terms of gaming trends. Like in general, people wanted to feel more connected during the pandemic, and the social component obviously grew. But like something along those lines that kind of reflecting back in the last few years, like, hey, this was a stronger trend, or maybe something that you were expected to be stronger, but it wasn't as strong. And then the part B of the question is, now looking forward in the next few years, maybe something that you're anticipating or you're expecting as something that will be the something that's going to continue to bring the mobile gaming industry forward into new things, whether it's based on hardware, the cloud connectivity, the AR, VR, all this other stuff. There's a lot of like big trends that seem to be going on in the technology space, and just trying to get your guys' insight of what you guys are expecting or thinking might occur.
I could add a quick nugget.
I'll do a quick one, and then you can go for a long time on that. Great, I'm sure. A few years ago, there are a few things you mentioned, like AR, Pokemon Go. There were so many companies that were like, oh, this is a new market. But then Pokemon Go is a little bit like World of Warcraft, where there's like not really air for other companies to do the same thing. Let's see. I'll throw it over to you because I had another one, but go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So we actually talked about one of them earlier, which is sort of fun. So these are the surprises. I have two surprises and one future service. So these two surprises, at least for me, was for my whole experience in mobile, audio was a no-no, right? Because most people have their phones silent. Like probably everybody in this room has their phone silent right now, right? And that's pretty common. But there's two changes that happened relatively recently, which have increase the importance of audio and adoption on phones, and one is Bluetooth headphones. So it used to be that you'd take your headphones out, you couldn't hear. So now with all these Bluetooth headphones, audio adoption is coming back. So that's kind of a big thing. The other one is TikTok. TikTok is driving a huge amount of adoption, and most of TikTok consumption needs audio. Not all of it, but most of it. And so these two, there's probably a bunch of other drivers, are driving the importance of audio in mobile like it's never been seen before. And so that's a surprise for me. I was like, whoa, that's new. That's crazy. So our team is sort of having to prioritize up audio. But that's also a great place for opportunities. So folks in the room are trying to think about where I can, maybe there's a blue ocean or a non-competitive part of the industry. Audio is relatively wide open because historically it's been an ineffective way of means. So that's sort of one thing. Other one that was pandemic related, which was interesting, is when everyone was sort of stuck at home, you, as expected, saw more gaming and more console and PC. But one of the surprises, you saw a huge uptick in mobile gaming. And why is that? You'd think like, well, why would people, why would they play console and PC? And there's sort of two drivers. One is that people whose primary device is a mobile phone is still a mobile phone. They're not going to all of a sudden like, I'm stuck at home, so I'm going to go buy a PlayStation 5, right? Either they don't have the means or it's just culturally not their primary device. All the youth of today, mobile's their first device. The second thing is when a lot of people are stuck at home together, you may have competition for the shared spaces. Like somebody's watching Netflix, and you want to play a game, so you're going to take your phone out and play it on your phone. So mobile had a huge uptick during the pandemic, but the interesting thing is coming out of the pandemic, mobile will survive better than console and PC because you can take it with you. Again, how many people have a console and PC with you? Nobody, right? Everyone's got their phones, and you can potentially play those games that you got exposed to during the pandemic. You'll continue to retain and play them now. So those are sort of two big, I think, surprises. I'll wait till the other one till later.
Go for
All right.
it.
Future services, future things. I'm a big believer that, and actually I think you touched on it on the onboarding, when Shelby was talking about how when you get into a game and you can have a different onboarding based on the kind of player you are, that live ops, that ability to customize a game for unique audiences, I believe that's the future of gaming. And it's not as cool as like AR and VR and meta and all this, I'll call it a little bit of silliness. Because it's proven, and the reason why I think this is so important is when you have a game like a Candy Crush or Words with Friends or a Zynga Poker or Free Fire, pick your favorite massive live service game that runs forever and has audiences in the hundreds of millions. Even for those audiences of hundreds of millions, they're all getting basically the same experience to some level. And why I was so fascinated talking to Lucy about Africa and trying to learn about these different parts of the world that are, those players play differently for whatever the reason may be, cultural, technology, time zones, doesn't matter. And if your game can sort of, I don't call it atomize services, but if the services can be slightly different for those audiences, then those games can serve them better. And I think that will ultimately, and that's what live ops is. Live ops is just a version of listening to what your players want and giving it to them. But it's really hard to do that when you're atomizing it. It can't be done by people. So that has to be done by machines or through user-generated content, letting the players do it themselves. And I think those two methodologies will blend together, but that's the future of, I think, mobile gaming, are live services that atomize content, and it's supported by both players, making content for themselves and their friends, or machine-driven services that look at the data and modify the content such that it's more appropriate for that demographic.
Is Wordle a video game?
Wordle?
Yeah.
And why did it explode so much?
So it is, and there are probably a few different ideas around why it became so viral, but one was just the shared experience of it all, right? It was one puzzle that we were all trying to figure out at the same time, and so it became it became like, water cooler talk. If you've figured out Wordle. And then again, it comes back to one of the elements of play that's so important, which is that it's like a shared social experience. And so it blew up. And if you weren't playing Wordle, you're like, I should pick up Wordle, right? Yeah. And that's how games go viral.
Yeah, just seeing it come across your feed, it's kind of cryptic, and unless you're in the game, you don't really know what they mean. And they're, I'm seeing 10 a day on my feed.
Guy in the blue shirt.
Sure. I feel like the onboarding for the industry is so fast moving. I find it interesting that gaming is almost a bit behind some of the industries, like kind of online retail, for example. If you look at something like Depop, with their product, they're already very much personalising that product to the user before the experience even starts. Why that kind of is lagging behind in gaming versus some other industries?
So why is personalization lagging in gaming versus other verticals?
I think you take that one.
I can answer that. It's because games are massively more complex. That's the core reason, right?
And they're different.
Yeah.
Every game is different too.
Yeah.
Where a shopping experience is pretty well known and not like a whole new tech stack and a whole new core loop and all of those things every single time. So you have to make that work and then do that.
Yeah,
I think
that's right.
One of the key areas that this does happen in gaming is the packages that are displayed to you for purchase. So knowing your purchase behavior and presenting you something that you're going to convert on, especially early in your cycle, and now with the Apple privacy changes, getting that signal early and getting you to buy something really helps the growth manager, the UA manager, know that channel is valuable and to invest more in it because there's going to be more payers coming. So there's a lot that happens that you may not see, and that's really ideally how this personalization is achieved.
Yeah, there's also a little bit of chasing too, which happens. So if you imagine that, say it's a storefront for a store that has the revenue, the store will be stable and probably profitable whether or not you do that customization onboarding, right? But it's beneficial. It helps improve the store's performance, but the store doesn't necessarily need it. Where when a game hits, you chase really, really, really quickly. So let's say you have a launch of, I'll use Scopely as an example. Scopely has a very successful Star Trek game that does very well. And when that went out there, they started to chase that thing like crazy. And they have to feed content and player mechanics to keep retention going on the growth of Star Wars. But it did get big enough and stable enough that they then went back, and I think they do now, Scopely and Star Trek, have multiple versions of store and onboarding for that particular game. But you don't want to invest in all that up front because you have to invest in it uniquely for each game. It's not sort of standardized across all games because every game's different. So you don't want to invest all that up front, then find out your game doesn't work, and you're like, God, I wasted all this money and time building this multifaceted onboarding tech that doesn't work for other games. So what you do is you first launch a game. If it works, you then chase the success of that game, and then at some point it's stable enough or it's big enough that you can hire a pod of engineers or a team to say, now make a custom onboarding for this custom unique game that's never existed before and wire that in. So that's typically how it actually kind of plays out. But then as mobile games that are highly retaining and old, most of the biggest games in the world are mobile games, and they're all over 5 years old. And some of the biggest games in the world, Candy Crush is doing billions of dollars a year, and it was launched 11 years ago now, I think. So think about the R&D that can go behind that game, the customization, the analytics, the diversification of that content. They can do a lot because it's a massive game that's been around for a long time. And of course, then you have all the competitors who realize that and are attacking it from all sides. So then they're trying to fend everybody off. So it's this, it's kind of a crazy problem. But that's sort of the rationale as to why, at least from the companies that I've seen.
I mean, my biggest surprise over the past few years, and this is as a newbie, is just how sophisticated the gaming industry is and mobile gaming industry is. What gets me excited about the future is also seeing, studios emerge coming at, founded by people who've been in the gaming industry for 15 years or 10 years or 5 years, who've worked on these amazing franchises or who've been, laboring in R&D at King trying to figure out how to retain the person for the 700th day. Because they have so much experience. It's like what you see with the PayPal mafia, right? Except we're going to see that happening across games, and the innovation that can emerge from that, I'm super excited about, right? Like the complexity you were talking about is now we're starting to figure out ways to solve for it and build these really complex systems because there's enough talent and sophistication within the industry to think, how do we take it to the next level? And that's just super cool.
Yeah, like an interesting point. In fact, our company, we're about 21 people. We've been around for about 5 years, and we've probably put at least $2 million in a team of 4 working for 4 years just on our content tools. That's nothing facing the game. That's nothing that's content or fun. It's literally the tooling on the back end just to be able to push content out to players in ways that we know ultimately make sense. And we're a relatively small team. So some of the big mobile teams are hundreds of people, $50 million, $100 million working for 5 years. People think mobile games are small. It's the largest sector of games is mobile, with the most profitable games, the longest lasting games, the biggest audiences. Mobile's really the place to be.
I think one thing that isn't obvious from that sometimes when people are breaking in is that it is kind of a winner takes all market if you're in free to play. So there are the big games at the top that have been at the top for 10 years, but it's very, very hard to break into that, and most of the revenue goes there, and it's not like a even distribution down if your chart positions 350, versus 1 to 10. It's not necessarily how you'd expect it. It basically goes to 0 very quickly. So that's another real challenge about it, going up against the incumbents and having all those tools. But as Lucy said, some of the new ones that are breaking in are companies, startups that have been seeded by people leaving companies that were established, and they really cut their teeth on running big games, and then now they can very nimbly and quickly do some really amazing things. So I think the question was, do we think that people are going to converge on one play style for everyone, or games that offer multiple play styles within one game? I think, as Travis was saying, it can be really, really complex, and that can be something that you invest in if your game is very large and doing well, but it's hard to do it right from the beginning, to create a whole bunch of different mechanics and have them go together really well. I think games that allow different roles and specializations are great, but wildly different play patterns, like if you wanted to put a puzzle player with a first-person shooter, they're not going to naturally come to the same game, partially from UA. Just every bit of the channel is going to be targeted at the most interested part of the audience. So we've seen there is room for a wide variety of play types in games, but I don't really see them all kind of merging into one.
I think that sounds right. It's interesting too, because there's also just the competitive, I don't want to call it the Darwinistic nature of the market, which is, let's say you have a game that does like okay at a first-person shooter and okay at a match 3 in sort of one game, right? And so players can kind of sort of, in this one game I get an okay match 3 and an okay first-person shooter experience. What ends up happening is the first-person shooter player is like, it's kind of an okay experience, but there's this other first-person game which only does that extremely well. And so it tends to pull those people out. And so when you sort of do a couple things mediocre, it's really easy to rip those players out through UA, or their friends go there and they draw their players in. Those things sort of get pulled apart. With the one exception of if you can collect an audience and that audience is relatively held in one place, you can then do that, like a Roblox or like a Minecraft, right? Where within Minecraft or within these platforms, you may have a subpar shooter and a subpar match 3, but it's within this kind of larger ecosystem. So I think the answer is it can be done. It just depends on what the players are looking for. So if they're really looking for a first-person shooter, they'll leave the Roblox and go play the first-person shooter. But if it's less about the game and it's more about the experience, i.e. creating something or playing together, then they'll stay within the Roblox environment and play a subpar first-person shooter because maybe their friend made it, or they're going to work on it together, or they have social play. So both exist. It's just sort of how do you think about it?
There's a great Malcolm Gladwell podcast about country music and rap music and pop music. Does anyone remember this podcast? It was like years ago. He basically talked about how like everyone listens to pop music because pop music, they don't say anything, right? So it's like so generic that you can like, we can all listen to the same song and it's just like about the beat and the feeling that you're getting. But that there's something about rap music and country music that's very specific. Right? When you listen to the lyrics of like a rap song or a country song, it's about speaking to that audience, right? There's like an affinity with like a rap artist and in the people that is listening to his or her music because of the specificity of the message. And the same thing goes for country music, and that's why you see like a lot of segregation between people who listen to country music and people who listen to rap music. And I think that's just like a really interesting analogy for gaming. It's like there will be games like Wordle that like we will all play because there's just like something really novel about it. But that there's in other spectrums, you just may want to have a very specific experience that only the best quality first-person shooter can give you. That like I will never play because I don't like shooter games, right? It's an identity and affinity that I think requires specificity.
Repeat that.
So I guess the question is, when you mean interoperable, do you mean like I earned a horse in World of Warcraft and now I want to take that horse to the horse racing game somewhere else? So I'm not an expert at all in this, but we did talk about this exact topic earlier.
That's why we're like,
here we are.
you mentioned
We're in
it.
the
Funny you mention that. So I think in my head, there's sort of two ways to look at it. There's and I'll try to remember this as well as I did at lunch, although I'm more fuzzy on it now for some reason. Maybe it's because all these people watching me. But so I'll use the horse as an example. Horse from World of Warcraft, taking that horse into a horse racing game. If the player who earned the horse in World of Warcraft wants to take it to another game, what's the incentive for that other game to receive the horse? Even if it could be moved. Let's say it is an NFT or it's a crypto horse thing, and it could be moved. The other game has no incentive to do it, unless there is an incentive, unless somebody figures out, well, the reason you want that horse to work in your game is a form of user acquisition, i.e., if my game can have the horse, then it's a form of UA. That's very measurable. That's the company could say like, well, is it worth me doing all the tech and the work to make this horse not just work in my game, but impact the economy, be tuned correctly, balance, be appropriate. There's a lot of complexity in that. So the answer is, if you can do that, that's a really good thing. The other problem is that how do you get that started in the first place? How do you get that wheel spinning? And I think the incentive there, at least today, seems to be raising capital. And so that the teams, it's relatively easy comparatively to raise capital in games that are crypto and NFT right now. That can get that wheel spinning. So I think there's a benefit there, and I think it will happen, but the ins and outs of that really have to do with this kind of game-to-game benefit for the game makers.
No, I totally understand that piece. Sorry, I mean,
No.
within your own universe even, like if you have multiple games, game developer, you guys have like multiple platforms that you could, because that would benefit you within your own universe essentially, right? Versus going to other platforms and other makers.
We did that at Warner Brothers with some games like Injustice 2, where we had the mobile and the console version, and there was incentive to play one and get rewards in the other if you hook up your account. So Exactly what Travis is saying, it's really hard for it to be done with other companies, but within a company, if you have multiple games, you can hook that up. It's still tough because even within, say, Warner Brothers, every studio may be using a different engine. So even there, it's easier within the same studio versus like across studios, but you can do it.
Let me use the mic.
Cool.
Sorry, I don't want to breathe on you. So 2 questions. The first one's about culture. So in other places in the world, the Middle East, Africa, there are stories, there are their own myths, there are mythology, and there's beautiful, rich history and storytelling. Do you think that's important in a mobile game? Do you think people connect to that? Or is it, I mean, it's always about good gameplay, right? Whirl is just a beautiful, elegant game. That's why it's so popular. It's a genius mechanic, right? But what do you think about the cultural side of things? And I'll ask my second question. It's quite different.
Cool. So I think this one's a pretty interesting one. I do think that there's a world for just great gameplay. Like, none of us are blue hedgehogs, but we all love Sonic. And so there's a world where like that I think makes sense. I think it's all about character development, though. Like, Riot now has Arcane, and they've taken these amazing characters from video games and made a TV show, and it is brilliant because the characters have depth. And I think those characters, like, come from a completely different world, but we all relate to them in certain ways. When it comes to stories on the continent, we think that there is a place to sort of bring and like have these stories come to life in the same way you, again, saw with Black Panther and Wakanda. It was like this amazing story that people got behind, and it was like based on this like mythical African place, and it didn't matter if you were from the continent or not. It was a beautiful story with well-developed characters. We want to like create a platform for some of these stories to emerge, but we don't think it's necessary for players to engage with other content, right? We say actually, like, as long as it's like a human story, our players will relate in the same way. So yeah, that's how we think about it.
I think it also depends on the region. So we've seen specifically with China that Western developed games, even if they're allowed to be published there or whatever, they don't perform as well as games made in China. And I think it's all those subtle things that you're talking about, like cultural background and expectations of how games work. And so we just, that's a specific one. And I think every region probably has that to some degree. And certain games will do well, like Heyday does well in Western markets, and it does surprisingly well in Japan. And, certain things do resonate differently in different cultures.
Yeah, I guess I'll throw one thing there. Also, there's this big separation between Hollywood and games where they both miss each other, and games are always core mechanic first. You can have a really successful game with no character, no story, and almost no art. I mean, Wordle and, Flappy Bird, great examples, right? Huge, hundreds of millions of people play those things, and there's none of that. So games fundamentally are always about game mechanic first, where Hollywood is always about story and character first. And so as long as that's sort of true, once a game is successful, you can then layer story on top of it. And, Witcher's a great example. It's sort of this great story that sits on top of kind of a relatively older, proven console sort of RPG mechanic. And then when the core mechanic is there and you layer the story on top of it, you get kind of the benefit of both. And then that, of course, translated into other great things.
Terrific, thanks. So my second question is, why isn't there more user-generated content in mobile games? Why? I know it's technically difficult. I saw a game at the DICE conference that has some very, very basic core gameplays. It's a mobile game, but it personalizes you. You become the actual person it looked brilliant, and they said they had 10 million actives already. So why is there not more UCG? Thanks.
Do you mean fully created, customized, so for example, like a t-shirt in Roblox versus something that could be considered user-generated content could be even just assembling my avatar out of things that were made by the developer and then showing that to other players. I think there's a whole spectrum of user-generated content where it's customization versus creation.
Yeah, it'd be beyond customization. It would be creation or being a part of the actual game process. I don't know what you're doing, I don't know what the mechanics are, but I just find that very intriguing. I know it's a huge sector in the game industry, and certainly in browser-based games, there's thousands of games that do it well.
Yeah, I can kind of answer that. So one of the things that we're endeavoring to do at our team. It's one of the reasons why we spent as much money on our tooling and the like. So one of the main reasons why, it's why you also don't see as much UGC in console, is that the platforms and the devices generally aren't well suited for kind of modding type people. So if you think about the PC, it's easy to hack, easy for people to kind of pull the games apart, build tools around them, deploy them, relaunch their game. So PCs and less Macs, but PCs are much easier for that world to sort of spin itself up. It's also why generally things like crypto and all that sort of starts on PC. You don't really see it as much on Mac, and you certainly don't see it on console or mobile. And it's primarily because the devices constrain that type of behavior. Now, that said, if you know what the behavior is, you can then build tools for your players once you know that there's heat, which is what we're doing. We're sort of building the tools because we know what we think we want players to do. The downside of that is we have to kind of guess. We can't just sort of put the game out there and say, go ahead and hack it, because Apple doesn't like that, right? And neither does Sony or Microsoft, or, well, I should say Xbox. But on PC, where the tools and everything, there's sort of a whole market for that, it's much more abundant. So that's sort of why. Also, think about device usage. You know, when you sit with a PC game, they tend to be what we call destination play. You choose to sit down and play this game for an hour or two. You're sitting at a computer with all this gear and source code and equipment and compilers and editing tools and whatever. If you're playing a mobile game at a coffee shop, which is the traditional, or sitting on your couch and somebody's watching Netflix, is probably a better example, you're less likely to be like, I'm going to go download some modding tools for this, right? Like, so that's really the cultural reason why. The technology limits it, but it doesn't entirely block it, but you have to spend R&D opening up that pipeline for people to do it, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
We have like 2 minutes left.
Okay, it's not a real question, it's like a topic. So, you see a lot of Twitch, right? So there's a lot of influencers in terms of gaming there. Do you feel that there's an inherent limitation with mobile gaming where you're not able to do that? Do you see in the future the ability to cast what's on your phone to Twitch in such a way that you can have the same type of engagement? I'm going to go sit down.
Yeah,
Cool.
that's growing for sure. I was contacted last week by a company here in Austin that raised a lot of money and around esports on mobile and casting that. And I think there's also a lot of desire to get traditional gamers on Twitch to play mobile games between their rounds and really open that up as a UA channel in light of the changes we've seen. But I'm excited for that. I love Twitch. I stream a lot.
We have time for you.
I'll make this quick. So if you're working in mobile game space and want to launch like a game that's successful globally, I think one topic you kind of like can't avoid is to study the Asian mobile games, and especially like China being so big on mobile, but consumer habit and the player habit being quite different. So I'm curious, like, what are some of your discoveries, learnings that you can share in that space, like in terms of the differences or similarities or opportunities for Eastern and Western market?
So one of the interesting things that we follow and actually think will apply really nicely on the continent is particularly around monetization motivations, right? You see particularly like in China on leaderboards, people will essentially pay whatever is required to get to the top of it as like a sign of status. It's like peacocking, and I think that's something that I think in like the US and maybe Western Europe is looked down on, right? Like, oh, you can't pay to get to the top of the leader. You have to earn it. This is a meritocracy. Versus I think that's us. I think that's the end. Wow. But actually something that we think will perform really well in our markets, just as an example.
Thank you. This has been great. Appreciate all the questions.